Good evening and welcome to the programme. While across Europe, lockdowns are easing and businesses are beginning to open. But experts are warning that the COVID-19 pandemic is far from over. Well, let's just have a look at the numbers, because there have been more than 1.3 million confirmed cases and more than 160,000 people have died across the continent. The human cost of this pandemic is now being weighed against the financial cost. The EU's three largest economies, Germany, France and Italy, are now all in recession, and the bloc's GDP is forecast to shrink more than 7% by the end of this year. Well, over the next hour, we will be looking across Europe to have an in-depth look at the ongoing battle between public health and the battle as well, of course, between public wealth. Our correspondents in Berlin, Rome and Brussels will be taking a look at how people are surviving in this financial crisis and what governments are doing to help. But first, Jeremy East has this report on how the lockdowns are being eased across the world.
How do you strike a balance between a country's wealth and health? All around the world, millions of jobs in factories, restaurants, and shops have been lost, while hundreds of thousands of people have died because of the coronavirus crisis. President Trump opened the debate back in March when he issued a clarion call for the U.S. to get back to work.
We cannot let the cure be worse than the problem itself. We're not going to let the cure be worse than the problem. People get tremendous anxiety and depression, and you have suicides over things like this. When you have terrible economies, you have death, definitely would be in far greater numbers than the numbers that we're talking about with regard to the virus.
Those sentiments have been shared by many Trump supporters. In various U.S. states, thousands have demanded the right to get back to spending time on the shop floor. From Washington to London or Stuttgart, the message from protesters is clear. Some are willing to pay a price for freedom rather than live in fear.
It is unacceptable that we are so badly treated, that our basic rights are taken away from us.
It's a deprivation of liberty. It's the greatest manipulation of people, and it frightens entire social groups. It's crazy, isn't it?
It's impossible to deny the financial toll of COVID-19. The pandemic has sparked talk of new economic models fueled by health and environmental concerns. And while there's still demand for cheap clothes, foreign foods, and holidays, some experts warn we shouldn't expect a sudden, significant change in the status quo.
I think that, the idea that we're going to stop global tourism dead in its tracks, and if you think about the effect that would have on economies, not only in countries in Europe like France and Italy, but also, frankly, in many parts of the developing world which rely on tourism. So that, in a sense, the challenge is how to allow benign change to occur to the economies of the world, but without stopping growth, particularly in, even in developed countries, but particularly in developing countries.
This week's Franco-German €500 billion recovery plan could be a model that breaks the EU's formula for lending and borrowing, but it's already meeting resistance from the so-called Frugal Four, bloc members who want to avoid sharing debt with other countries. Germany normally counts among them too, but as Chancellor Merkel has made clear, the unusual nature of the crisis requires an unusual path.
Well, for more on this, let's go over to Berlin now, where we can speak to our reporter, Jona Kalgren. Jonas, we were just hearing there Angela Merkel talking about this unusual path which the country must take, if not Europe. Of course, in February, Germany announced as this crisis was beginning that it was abandoning its decades-old policy of not having any government borrowing. So can we expect any more radical measures?
Well, they've already thrown a lot of money at this crisis, €1 trillion or somewhere around there in loans and direct support for companies and people. But if this crisis continued, then the German government would probably throw even more money at it. But there is a debate here in Germany kind of heating up about where this money should go. For example, some people are saying that we should support the car industry in this country by a bonus bonus when people buy a new car. Others are saying, no, that is not a climate-friendly way to go into the future. So the debate is heating up. Should the money go only to, for example, green projects, green companies, or should you try spread it around everywhere around in order to save every kind of workplace?
You know, another shift for Angela Merkel has been on shared European debt. Of course, she rubbished the idea of coronavirus bonds, but she has come together this week, we've seen in that report, with Emmanuel Macron. So why this sudden change?
Well, it's extraordinary. It's no other way to describe it. This has been a long-held German position to oppose these types of measures. But of course, we're in an extreme situation right now. Now, I think that Angela Merkel realized that. She's often said a strong Germany needs a strong Europe. And she's probably realized that the only way we're going to get a strong Europe out of this situation is with direct support of countries like Spain and Italy. And Germany is going to have to pay a part of that bill. So that's probably that realization has happened. There is another important thing here as well, and that is that Angela Merkel is not going to run in the next election as the leader of the Christian Democratic Party, and she's also right now the most popular politician in Germany, meaning she has an extraordinary amount of political capital to spend, and it's clear that she's decided to spend at least some of it on this plan to save the European Union.
Jona, don't go anywhere. We'll be speaking to you soon, but for now, from Berlin, thank you. Well, Italy is one of the European countries that would benefit heavily from a shared debt recovery plan. Businesses have been hit hard by the pandemic, but the government is moving to ease lockdown measures and bring the struggling economy back to life. Giorgio Orlandi joins me now from the Italian capital. Oh, Giorgio, Italy's government, of course, was already facing a severe debt crisis, so it must be applauding this action that's been announced only this week by Angela Merkel and the French President Emmanuel Macron.
Hi, Jacques. Well, Italian Prime Minister Conte has welcomed the Franco-German recovery deal, but he also said that much more needs to be done. He said that Europe should not repeat the mistakes of the past by doing too little and reacting too slowly. And he said that these would bring to a point in which we would fan, he said, the flames of nationalism, and we would see more divisions within the EU. Well, that's not surprising if you think that Prime Minister Conte has been leading the charge against the lack of solidarity in Europe, especially at the time of Italy's statement that was a yes to corona bonds or nothing. But if on one hand Prime Minister Conte sounded also a bit cautious, saying that whatever is going to be agreed in Europe has to be approved by Parliament, on the other hand, opposition parties like the League Party, for example, have been insisting on the fact that von der Leyen's apology to Italy is not enough, and they've been insisting on the fact that Italy should not bow down to Brussels' requests. And if things do not go as planned, one of the political consequences of these is that there would be an increased support for right-wing parties over the next few weeks and months. Talks.
Well, we've heard from Italy over its plans to boost its tourism sector, but it's only been a few weeks now that businesses have started to reopen their doors. So how close are they to sort of resuming the levels which they were at before the lockdown started, Georgia?
Well, Talks, they're still quite far. If you think that Italy's economic forecast looks quite grim already, the International Monetary Fund has said that the country's GDP is set to fall by 9% this year, and also Italy's unemployment, which reached 9% in 2019, could reach 11% this year. This is why the government approved last week a package of measures that is worth 55 billion euros to sustain the country's economy, to help battered businesses, struggling families, but also to help those people who don't have any income at all. We're talking about those people who are completely excluded by the welfare safety net, people who used to do undeclared work. This is very common in Italy, much more common than in other parts of Europe. I had the chance to visit one area here in Rome that has the highest number of people who used to do undeclared work before the nationwide lockdown began. They've told me they had no choice but to do undeclared work. Take a listen.
It's been 3 months that I haven't bought a single euro back home. I managed to carry on going as the food I need is being given to me. And then I've done a few things here and there, but there's no income at all. I worked a total of 3 days in 3 months. Undeclared work is completely blocked. That's what I do, unfortunately. At my age, I don't get the chance of being offered a job. What should I tell my family? What? That even today I'm just not bringing any income home. That luckily we'll manage to get by somehow. How long is this going to go on for? I can't take it anymore.
Well, the income from both the underground economy and illegal activities plays a crucial role in the country's economic growth. That's why the government has to take that into account to avoid that people in the long term are going to accept the help offered to them by criminal organizations. Talks.
Giorgio Orlandi there in Rome. Thank you. Well, from the Italian capital, let's go over to the Belgian capital now, the heart of the EU, where we can speak to our correspondent, Jack Parrock. Jack, we heard Georgia there just talking about, of course, Italy's response to how the EU, of course, addressed it when the outbreak first emerged in the country and it was eventually forced to apologise. So is this now an opportunity for the EU to take a lead as countries start easing their lockdowns?
It's certainly what the administration of the European Commission is hoping. The EU really at the beginning of the coronavirus crisis struggled to unify the countries for a number of reasons. Firstly, because the borders went up and the countries have their own decision to do that. They tried to coordinate the borders and the border checks, but really struggled to do that. Also, healthcare in the European Union is a national competence. It isn't a centralised EU competence, which has meant that the healthcare responses have obviously been different. The one thing it has tried to do is to coordinate the economic response. And there was this €540 billion fund that was targeted to workers, to healthcare, essentially to businesses and also to governments to deal with the healthcare issues as well. And that was put forward, that's already been in the works, it's expected to come into force on the 1st of June. But they're really now fighting over how to deal with the long-term economic fallout and this fund that they're putting forward. We heard from Jona earlier about this U-turn from the German Chancellor, essentially. The Germans have always resisted mutualising debt across the EU countries and this idea of a Euro bond or whatever. And now they've decided that they will back that. Her and Emmanuel Macron at the beginning of this week saying that they propose a €500 billion fund in the next EU budget.
Well, Jack, they're going to presumably have to reach a compromise, but where might they find common ground?
This is it. There are huge divisions over this fund. The Italians and the Spaniards, the Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez initially was the one that put forward this idea, and he was talking about a €1.5 trillion fund to go into the budget. What they want is it to be unconditional. They want it to be able to take that money, to use it to support their businesses, to support their economies, especially in those countries like Spain, Italy, with high public debt already. But we've already heard from Austria, from Sweden, Denmark and the Netherlands, that the Dutch Prime Minister being very strong, saying that they simply won't allow money to go to countries without the insistence of reforms to their economies and reforms to their political structures dealing with the economies. So there's this massive division now, and we expect actually the European Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen, that she will put forward a proposal for this fund to sit within the budget, which is a 7-year budget, needs to come into place by the 1st of January 2021. She's expected to put that out next week, and I think there's going to be a it's going to be the start of quite a big battle over what it ends up looking like.
We'll certainly be following every blow. Jona Kalgren in Berlin, Giorgio Orlandi there in Rome, and Jack there in Brussels. Thank you for now.